Thank you all for coming. I'm Michael Ettlinger. I direct the Carsey School of Public Policy here at the University of New Hampshire. We're here to talk about President Trump's first 100 days. It's actually day 82. But with this president, what are the odds that anything interesting will happen in the next 18 days? We thought we were in totally safe grounds. We do think that actually it was actually scheduling issues, and we figured there's enough to talk about to fill an hour. So just to be clear, this is a discussion we're going to have, where it's not a debate, it's not a protest. Those are two very worthy activities in our country, but that's not what we're doing today. And it's really, this discussion is not so much about the pros and cons about President Trump's policies, but about sort of how this presidency has uniquely provoked such a strong response, and either related or unrelated, historically low approval ratings at this point in a presidency. And really, has there ever been a stronger reaction other than the reaction to Abraham Lincoln to a new president, which of course had states seceding and Fort Sumter being fired on by the Confederates 39 days into his presidency? And it's actually today is coincidentally the 156th anniversary of the firing of the Confederacy on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. So, but fortunately, we have not seen that level of response, but we have seen a lot of anger and a very strong response negatively. Although I think it is important to note that among those who voted for President Trump, there's still very strong support in the polls for him. So when you see these low approval ratings, you're seeing the low approval of Democrats and people who didn't vote for the most part. There's been some shaving off of his supporters, but pretty modest. So that's just by way of introduction. To have a conversation about this, we've invited Tom Rath to be here, and we're very grateful for him being here. I'll just give you a little sense of his background. So Tom is the founder of the Concord-based firm of Rath, Young, and Pignatelli. He is the former Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire and has been actively involved in government relations, representing companies such as Fidelity, Anthem, Northeast Utilities, and many others in New Hampshire, in New England, and nationally. He was appointed by President George H.W. Bush to be a director of the National Legal Services Corporation, which got zeroed out in the Trump budget recommendation. He served as the chair of the for the election campaigns for Senators Warren Rudman and Judd Gregg. He actively assisted in the confirmation process of Justice David Souter. He's served as a senior national advisor to the presidential campaigns of Howard Baker, Bob Dole, Lamar Alexander, Mitt Romney, and George W. Bush. So I guess that's 3 nominations in one president. Pretty good. He has been a delegate to the Republican National Convention on 9 occasions, and he was the Republican Party National Committeeman for New Hampshire for 2, 4-year stints. He's widely respected as a political analyst at both the state and national level, appears regularly on national, regional, and state television news programs, and I think you were on New Hampshire Public Radio yesterday or today. And he serves on numerous educational and trade association boards. I'd add he tweets at Paul Guru, P-O-L-G-U-R-U. So obviously a very distinguished career, and reading in between the lines, I guess you're a Republican, and yeah, so I pick up those subtle signals. I wanted to say just a couple of words about me, since these days I think people should be, we should be transparent about who we are and our background. So I am the director of the Carsey School of Public Policy for the last 2.5 years. I'm the founding director. Before that, though, I worked in Washington for many years, where I worked at progressive think tanks, mainly on economic, tax, and budget issues. And I will just say that, the places I worked and the people I worked with are largely working now to oppose President Trump's policies, and I'm not unsympathetic to what they're doing. So just want that to be out and on the table. So with that, I guess, my Twitter address is M. Ettlinger, but I'm much less interesting than and never talk about the Red Sox like this. One last just preliminary thing. We're going to talk for a little bit, and then we'll be opening it up to questions. The form of us being opened up to questions is, I believe you have index cards and pen. Yeah, those are not for a miniature golf game we're going to play later. The little pencils, they're for you to write questions on, and you can feel free to hand them in at any time, and then we'll sort of work them into the conversation in 20 minutes or so, or half hour. The people who will collect them are, you want to raise your hands?
We'll just go up and down the aisles a few times.
Yeah, Sue, Amy, Laurel, to gather them. So that's how we'll be doing that. All right, so enough of the preliminaries. To get into the conversation, let me just start off by asking Tom the question, so why? Why, just to be clear, why, why has there been such a strong reaction to this president, and whether, his approval ratings are not good? Is it what he's actually done as president? Is it just the times we live in? Would any president be facing this? Is it him particularly?
I think it's probably all of the above, but let me try to put it in a little different context. As Americans, we only get one chance every 4 years for all of us to vote on the same thing at the same time. And that's at the quadrennial presidential election. And that usually kind of settles things for a while, or at least gives us a direction. Leaving personalities aside for a moment, and not permanently because you can't in this circumstance, I don't think this election settled very much. And I think the people who were upset before the election are still upset. I think the people who felt very strongly on either side still feel very strongly on either side. And it's sort of more who I am, but I believe in the end, the middle, the center must come together to make the extremes behave. And the center has not come together. This election divided more than it united. And I will give you another time a much longer dissertation about, if you want to know the evils of Citizens United, this election is a really good example of it, because there are causes and voices and stirrings of the pot that can go on now forever, independent of an election result, and it can be a vessel for raising money and keeping people employed. So that's part of it. The other side of it is that this is the most unique personality that in my time we've ever seen. And no one, including the people who voted for him, are comfortable with him. And nothing that has happened really in the 82 days, and it just seems like 4 years, but in the 82 days has done anything to settle that upset. We always look for kind of moments of grace and sort of genuineness, and that a lot of time will cut across policy differences, whether it's in an inaugural address or occasionally, unfortunately, in the wake of a national tragedy. We haven't found that moment yet, and he himself, and it's part of him is a reflection of who we are. We demand fast reactions back and forth. Twitter makes it, no one can complete a sentence, and when you allow that to happen, I mean, most of the folks I've worked for, including me, would have a hard time even explaining to you what Twitter is. But an awful lot of people are on it, and he's on it all the time, and his unfilteredness to the American public is something we're just not used to. And he has done nothing in the time, and maybe there are two instances I can think of where maybe you could say it broke through, but we expect certain things of a president, and he has not yet done those. It's not necessarily policy related, although you could make an argument about policy. It is more on how he has approached and occupied the office. And that's a value that I think transcends partisan politics. You could have people who you disagreed with become president. And when they were president, they were the president. I've never seen a situation where more people think somehow something is going to happen and, next week the army is going to come down from the north and chase everybody out of Westeros. It's not going to happen. And I think one of the things we're having a hard time coming to grips with is he's going to be president for 4 years. And we just better get used to that. And then he's got to get used to being president. And it has not been easy to get there. That's a long answer, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that those, I forget what the phrase, moments of grace or moments where there's sort of a unifying feeling. I guess the moment people thought had happened that I can think of, you mentioned two, the one that comes to my mind is the address to Congress, which in some ways was kind of just had all the standard checkbox elements in an address to Congress, but coming from him, it was showing concern for parts of the population, which he'd, frankly shown disdain at prior to that, and so that was that moment, and then that didn't last very long.
No, the other one I was referring to was I thought his comments, especially the second set of comments after the chemical attack in Syria, were genuine. And he spoke to a kind of shared conviction about there are certain things that countries do that are wrong. And using chemical gas to kill your citizens and children and babies were wrong. And I thought that was a moment that Americans could say, all right, that's a value that I buy into. And somehow maybe it was more noticeable because it was less expected.
It's a little sad that that's our common.
No, but I'm just saying
those are the two.
Those are the two. Well, those are the two I was referring to.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I think we can all agree on that. Can we talk about one of the things that I think from the world I came from and that was provocative were his appointments. Right. I mean, he had so. I've been involved with the transition process, and something about the vetting, and I'm sure you've been engaged in these things. And they vet these people very carefully, and you tally up all the baggage that various people are carrying. They didn't pay taxes on this or that, or they said this, and you certainly see, and presidents choose sometimes to appoint people to positions who have some baggage just because they think they're important to their administration and they're willing to deal with it. But it's something generally to be avoided because you want it to be about your agenda, not about the baggage. And you are trying to bring the country together, so appointing people who provoke, But he is, we could go through the list, but I'm just wondering if there are any, what you think about the appointments and the role that's played, and whether, you have any thoughts on any individual ones.
Well, it's been extraordinarily slow. And that is more, I think, more borders on malpractice than on prudence. I think it is, I remember once when somebody asked a candidate for president to name the presidents of several small countries, and they weren't able to do that. And I was working with my friend Lamar Alexander then, and I asked Lamar that question, and he said, it's not important that the president of the United States know the names of all those people. But the president of the United States should know somebody who knows the name of all those people. And so it's not important that he understands or can tell you who is an expert in labor or EPA, but there should be people around him who present to him choices. And as we've seen played out, and this is in some ways the transparency of this administration in terms of his tweeting and the amount of leaking going on and all the rest is remarkable. And I'm not saying we're going to operate government behind a cloud, but you need to be able to make some tough choices. And the way these names have been trotted out and then knocked down and trotted out, knocked down, hurts. And it hurts on the level of some people saying, you know what, I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to put myself through that. And the other thing is if you don't get people at the top you can't fill below them. And the handful of people that he's gotten through to confirmation have then not been able to people the rest of the agencies. A very important thing for us, New Hampshire, is not who the Secretary of HHS is, but who's the regional secretary of HHS? Who's going to sit in Boston and make a decision about how those funds get passed out? That's a very important kind of thing, and that you can extrapolate that all across the country. Well, there's a lot of states, we're one of them, that don't have a Republican senator. And typically, if you have a Republican president, the Republican senator in the region has a lot to say with that. Where they don't have Republican senators, they're supposed to go to Republican governors. And we're a state that doesn't have a Republican senator, but has a Republican governor. Well, there's been no running of those names at that level. Somebody said to me today, who's going to be the U.S. attorney? And it's the same kind of situation. So until you get, it's not just enough to people the cabinet table, it's filling in the blanks. And it's been hard to do. And I think one of the reasons it's been hard to fill the top is because I don't think they feel they have the ability to put around them the kind of people they want. Now, having said that, there are a lot of appointments we don't know anything about yet. We just don't know how they're going to perform. I know some people are very negative on Jeff Sessions. I think it's too early to tell. I will tell you, I was an attorney general with Jeff Sessions. I didn't know him well, but I can tell you, at least among his colleagues at the time, he was well respected. And so we'll see. We'll see what he does, and we'll see. But we need to know who's going to run his civil rights division. We need who's going to run affirmative action for him. We don't know any of those names yet. I think I have some hope that in the area of foreign policy, and we saw this in the last couple of weeks, General McMaster is going to be a strong and smart person, and he seems to have forced some other people to the side. I have some, I think General Mattis is going to be a very strong head of the Department of Defense, and we'll see how that goes. And I have a fair amount of hope for Rex Tillerson. And I think we will get a good judge on him from the couple of days that he's in Russia. He sat down with Putin today. And Tillerson is a tough business person. And I said, I've been telling people this, you can ignore this, but if you want to know a little bit about him, Google Tillerson/jury duty. And you'll read a very interesting story about his character and who he is. And we'll see. I mean, and then it's a question of whether you can have the best people there, but then somebody's got to listen to them. And when Howard Baker was chief of staff in the second Reagan administration, and we got talking about it, and I didn't know Reagan well, and we all knew the phenomena was Reagan. I said, what's it like to work with him like that? And Baker said a really interesting thing. He said, Ronald Reagan has a central core of conviction. And he said, if the issue falls within that central core of conviction, he knows everything about it. He knows its subtlety, he knows its history, he understands it. If it falls outside of that, he has a total sense of belief in his ability to make decisions. So he tries to get very good people to bring him choices, and he's not afraid to make the choices. And if you look at some of the people that were around Baker, around Reagan, like Jim Baker and others, you could see that matrix. And I don't think that is the job of the president is just way too big for any person. So you've got to know this sort of breadth, and you've got to bring people together, and you've got to make decisions. We just haven't seen that here, and his reach seems to be rather limited, and I'm not sure his grasp isn't exceeded by his reach, no matter how limited it is. He just doesn't seem to have a policy interest as much as he does a dynamic in terms of telling people who's in charge.
Just sticking on the appointments for a minute.
By the way, I should have said, I think, and I know people here will probably disagree with me, Neil Gorsuch could have been appointed to the United States Supreme Court by any one of the more reputable, as you would put, a Republican presidents. He's a very solid appointment.
I'll come back to him in a second.
Yeah.
But I actually in terms of I mean, he has appointed cabinet and higher level and White House people. And I guess the thing that strikes me is, you pick someone like Bannon, who, I mean, just to put it calmly, has baggage. I mean, he was the publisher of Breitbart, which publishes some very offensive things. You have something like, I mean, Jeff Sessions, I don't know if he's, I don't know what's in his heart, but he was rejected for a judgeship on the basis of concerns about his views on race. I mean, so just, you have Pruitt, who's like opposed the EPA his whole career. Rick Perry wanted to abolish the Department of Energy. I mean, like any one of these, you could sort of, okay, well, Trump has faith, you'd want him. But they were appointments, there were other people who could have been selected for these roles. And these are appointments that, whether they turn out to be good or bad, are definitely ones that would be offensive to people. So do you have any sense of, do you think he just doesn't care? Or, like, I'm just saying that in other administrations, even if you like someone, you might not appoint them just because you don't want to send a signal, especially when he brings in the baggage he brings on himself on race and on gender issues.
It's hard when we choose somebody who has no track record. And so we're, watching this unfold when we're used to people who are very settled political personas. Even somebody like Barack Obama, who really only had 2 years in the Senate, but had been a political figure for a period. They've got some lineage that we can trace. He doesn't. And I don't know that he has, and usually in that lineage you can discern at some point a respect for the process and respect for the office. And they bring that with him, and he hasn't done that. I suspect that a lot of the people who he's appointed, he never met till he was considering them to be part of the appointment process. And that's hard. It's a lot for some people, giving up their private lives to get into a situation where there's uncertainty as to how much latitude you're going to have and what kind of direction you're going to get is a hard one to do. So your pool gets smaller. I think there's a very good possibility that what his cabinet looks like a year from now is very different than what it looks like today. And I think there will be churning and there will be changes. And the personal staff is a more interesting question, and the press seems to be fascinated by it. And Bannon is the one that seems to attract a lot of attention. How many people here know how Steve Bannon made his money? From what?
Seinfeld.
For what?
Seinfeld.
Seinfeld. He was working for a company that was raising capital for a company called Castle Rock Entertainment. And one of the things, they only owned like 5 shows, and one of them was this new show called Jerry Seinfeld. And they said to him, we don't have the money to pay your fee, will you take 5%? And he did, and Seinfeld has now earned something like $3 billion in rerun fees, and he's made $30 million. So there was a show about nothing, and you could almost you could fill in the blanks. But he's a very hard charger, and there's an edge to him that is not easily blunted. Reince Priebus, who I do know and could consider a friend, I think is in a different position. And I think there's some people who are trying to manage it, and he will probably get criticized a lot more than he deserves. And he's got a very hard job managing that White House staff. The staff has to realize that they are there to serve the president, and they're not there to get book deals when they leave and lecture fees. And there's some who seem to not understand that, and it's where you sit. I mean, if you watch a couple of the meetings, the entire staff is always there. And that either says one thing, either they're all involved or they want to make sure that somebody else isn't there instead of them. So I don't think the White House is settled. And I think a president needs clarity. A president, at the end of the day, must decide what the staff is going to do and how they're going to work and how they're going to be comfortable with it. And I think this is a White House that's very, very much in flux and appears like it will stay in flux. And some of that starts from the beginning, because if he doesn't have strong core of conviction, if you want to use that term, it's harder for them to know where the stakes are in the ground. And so there is that. And I think also everything is hot. There are no small issues yet. I mean, things that would normally be trivial are elevated beyond any measure, and there is nothing that he doesn't respond to. And I think that's one of the things you learn, is there's a time when you turn it off and you don't have to hear it. And apparently that time doesn't happen very much. I'm being, I mean, he is the president. He's going to be the president for 4 years, and he has skills. And we have to see where those skills manifest itself. But again, I'll go back to my central thesis is this country is still very much at odds with itself. And the election was not about coming together, it was staying separate. And all of us have to realize that very few people maybe in a room like this will have voted for Trump or will have even voted happily for Hillary. But you got to realize how irrelevant we were to this process this time. And there was a core of people that are out there that are really angry, and they cannot articulate why they're angry, and they just feel things aren't right. Now, a lot of those voters for many years were Democratic voters. And they're union workers, they're coal miners, they're folks that have been in organized labor. And they're the ones that deserted it and changed this dynamic. They know more, they can articulate more what they're against. It's harder to say what they're for. And if we are electing people on the basis of what they're against, we don't give them much of an agenda as to what they're for. You saw him say, well, the first thing we're going to do is throw out Obamacare, which is a great thing to say. And I've been to lots of Republican events the last 2 years, and you say that and everybody cheers. And nobody then says, well, what happens? No, what happens? Oh, so you do it. What happens? And nobody ever pushed them to answer that. So when they came time where they looked as though they had the majority to do something, nobody could agree on what that something was. And I'm hoping that having been through a couple of these, if there are going to be changes, they're made with more reflection and more attempt to bring people together, as opposed to say, we've got the votes and you don't. And we may start to see that, but if there's a second bite at that apple, it's not going to be as big. And maybe it says, well, the core part of it is okay, but we've got to work around how to make it work better. Taxes is another one that we've got to figure out. What has surprised me is the set of priorities. The one priority I thought was a gimme putt was infrastructure. I thought we'd be putting roads and buildings and all the rest, which is something that America ought to do periodically. And you talk about people who said, I built the Holland Tunnel or I built the Golden State Bridge, and we have infrastructure that's crumbling, and that impacts our ability to compete worldwide. Why don't you start there? And some of it comes back, Michael, to what you said, because they don't have people in place who can lay that out. And so that's less exciting to talk about on Morning Joe than what Steve Bannon said last night. But I think that's where you have to get to.
You were touching on foreign policy. I happen to have talked to a number of former State Department people over the last few weeks, and I'll just recount two conversations. They were with two people who'd been in high State Department, political appointees, high positions in the State Department, one under Bush, W. Bush, and one under Obama. And what was interesting was the one who'd been a Bush appointee can't sleep at night. I mean, he's like, they say all these things, they contradict each other. Our allies aren't going to know what to think. Our enemies aren't going to know what to think. Who knows what's going to happen when our foreign policy is so unpredictable. and this could be terrible, or we're going to or some of these things we're going to back ourselves into a corner where we have to do something, get involved in a war or something where that we really shouldn't be in. So that was the Bush appointee. Interestingly, the Obama appointee was more sanguine about it. He was more kind of that, well, Tillerson and the generals and that have been appointed to these positions, that Trump is very deferential to the generals, and and his word was they're boring people, in the sense that they're conventional, their views on American foreign policy are conventional, and that'll be sort of a normal foreign policy. I just it was interesting to me that these two very senior people who've been in the Situation Room had extremely different perspectives.
Well, one of the things that's guided our foreign policy for 30 years plus is in effect a single state Europe. That's coming apart. That's been the core of the way we looked at the world. And Europe is, with Brexit, is coming apart, and some of the European countries are facing exactly the same kind of fissures that we're facing in terms of how their populations are dividing. So it's hard, and we were nominally the leader of that cadre. And if it doesn't crumble, it dissembles, it's harder to bring forward that. And I think of all the things that a president must do, the most critical one is to speak clearly and consistently as to what the United States of America stands for in the world. Now, I am old enough and I don't know, not foolish enough, but I believe that we are a very special place, and we have operated by very special rules. Now, that doesn't mean we can go into Germany or France or even Syria and tell them how they should live. But we should say there are certain places where there are certain core principles of who we are and how we treat each other and how we look at the world. And we believe in those things. And there is a consistency, I think, in our foreign policy, Republican and Democrat, going back a large number of years. And the divide probably in one way is the Bush foreign policy types were types, and Obama was a new president coming in who only had 2 years in the Senate, so there's a little difference there. But there's a core constituency, there's a constancy to how we do it. This has created great uncertainty in that, and we don't know where it is and where we're going. And I think if I had to be critical, the domestic stuff, not things about race and how we treat each other, but the argument about what's the best kind of health care to have and what's the right level of taxation, how do we stimulate jobs, those we can handle. What we cannot do is speak with multi-voices around the world. And I think believe me, the last person they're going to listen to. But if there was something I would like, it would be to get clarity on that. And the president approached that, I thought, in the joint address to the Joint Session of Congress. We need to say there are principles there, and this is where I stand, and I will not go beyond that. And there are parts of this world that are testing those, and we need to say, no, I think the Putin regime is an illegitimate one. And I think whether they played here in the election or not, they clearly are doing things around the world. The Assad regime is beyond corrupt, and he's propping them up for their own reasons. Somebody needs to have a voice that is moral and consistent and speak forcefully on that. Ronald Reagan could do that. George H.W. Bush could do that. I think Barack Obama could do it because he represented, just by walking on the stage, what is possible in America. I think there's an enormous significance to that. And those are big shoes to fill, but it seems to me if you want to be president, you've got to be prepared to do that. And you need to be able to embrace that gravitas. And I think if I had to be critical of these days, we haven't sent that message. Now, you said it's 82 days, and that's right. It is 82 days. So there is time, but you need to empower. If Tillerson's your guy, then you need to empower him. And the people around him, we don't need to. There's a great picture that ran the other day, and it was stunning in its similarity. I think everybody in the room probably can remember the picture that was taken in the White House Situation Room when they killed Obama, when they killed bin Laden. And Obama and Hillary Clinton are sitting there, and the picture's down, and they're watching. And a week ago, when they went and bombed Syria, there was a picture taken in Florida of the same people in the same kind of room, making this decision and watching the launch. I think there's a moment when it hits you as to what it is you're doing. And I'm waiting to see whether they learned that. When you sit in that room and realize the decision that you made had that kind of impact on the world, and the world's waiting to see how that plays out, I think it changes you. And I'm hoping that there's a maturity that comes through, not just to the president, but to those around him, and say there is a purpose here, and it's more than really who controls the gossip the next day. We cover this all the time like it's a baseball game, and we cover, it's as important as what's happening in the third inning and who's sitting where on the bench, and we miss the bigger strands. And I think we have, and part of this is people like me, we walk around, we tweet, we have these things in our pocket that tells us instantaneously what's going. There's no time for reflection here. We never had this access to data. We had three people. You had Howard K. Smith, you had Walter Cronkite, you had Tom Brokaw, and everybody watched one of, or Chet Huntley, and David Brent, watched 1 to 3 newscasts, and they talked broadly. And now we can watch news all day long, and if we want to hear nothing but liberal viewpoints, we can watch one. And we want to hear nothing but conservative, we can watch another. And the ability to bring people together has been damaged by this. And he, President Trump, is a product of that. And that's how he thinks about the world. And I think the great presidents we've had, including the recent ones, have learned there's a time when you must get beyond that. So and usually you have a lot of latitude the first 100 days to move things forward. But he, by the way, he got a Republican Congress, he got a Republican Senate, Republican House, Republican Senate. But this capital that you build up was there. Now, he got elected in a very different way, and he didn't have the kind of electoral blessing, but that should have tempered then what you should do. But you still should have had a moment when you could move some things forward and communicate that bigger vision.
So, of course, his response to not having the capital was just to assert he did, but, it was sort of, it was sort of as opposed to your point that he could have sort of used that, sort of acknowledged it and tried to bring people together instead of he just sort of denied it. So I just, one thing you mentioned is that everything's hot, right? And, they could have gone with infrastructure, which has is safer. No one's like against it. Maybe people are spending all the money on it, but no one's against bridges. But that was kind of a choice, right? He's picked, immigration's a hot issue. You're gonna have different views on it. Refugees, which has historically been pretty bipartisan. He's sort of, focused on Muslims. Just like hot stuff. And climate change. And his budget. Which is like, his budget recommendation has bigger cuts on the domestic side than even the budgets that the House Republicans were passing under Obama, which were thought of as message bills. So, I don't know, it seems like there was almost a choice to do the hot things. It's like he was going for ratings points or something.
Well, I think you're right. It's what's going to dominate, and he wants, I think we have a tendency to confuse movement with progress. And you get a lot of movement, it doesn't mean you're getting progress. And the cooler heads say, what can we accomplish now? And we do things now that set things up down the road. We haven't had that. And you're right. I think when you win, especially when you win a close election, what you want to try to do is find things that bring people together so you can create a governing center and you go out from that. They did not do that. That was not a choice they made.
So that brings the other question about the Times. So the one thing that, just in terms of a concrete Democratic response, that I thought was best evidenced by the Times was, in fact, the Gorsuch, not giving them the votes to overcome a filibuster for Gorsuch. Because I talked to people on the Democratic side in D.C., and there were enough Democratic senators to overcome the filibuster who wanted actually to do it, because they saw Gorsuch the way you described him, as kind of a conventional Republican pick, not the one to go, They were very bitter about Garland, which colored their thinking. But more importantly, the base was very bitter about Garland and made it very, very difficult for some Democratic senators who would have supported him to do so. And you can see the response of the 3 Democrats who announced it. They just, are getting hammered. So I just wanted to come back, quickly, and then I want to get to questions. But how much is it? It's all interrelated in the sense that the candidate is a product of the Times, and he, to my mind, drove a wedge in the divisions that were already there. How much of it, like if John Kasich had been elected president, do you think that the response to, leaving aside approval ratings, but more just the visceral response from Democratic and Democratic-leaning people would have been that visceral? Would they have given John Kasich the votes to confirm Gorsuch without getting rid of the filibuster?
Well, first, if John Kasich had been elected president, I would be consul general to Bermuda, and I wouldn't be here. So,
well, thank God he didn't win.
So that didn't happen. I don't know. I am so troubled about where our politics are, and that the use of the Supreme Court. There's a really interesting piece in the New York Times today, I don't know if anybody read it, about David Souter and how that confirmation changed the course of the Supreme Court. I'm not sure I agree with that, having been through it, but I understand what they're saying. Supreme Court nominations have become opportunities for fundraising. And it becomes a way to say we're right and they're wrong, and it's very hard to appoint somebody today who, the very questions that they vote yes or no on, would you overturn Roe? And the answer to that is, and his answer was, I give great respect to precedent. I don't think he should answer that question. That denies the essence of what a judge does. Who knows what case is going to present itself that hits fissures in the Roe decision that causes a second look? But you shouldn't commit in advance that you're going to do something on it. And that's, Republicans are guilty of that, and Democrats are guilty. They have taken the court and made it into politics. And I think that's a mistake. And I think Gorsuch, I frankly, not infrequently, I'm a minority in my own party, I think Garland should have gotten a hearing. And I thought that was it. And some of me said, politically, if Hillary's going to get elected president, the Republicans would have been very well chosen to confirm Garland, because you're probably going to get a more liberal appointment. I've been through the nominating process, and it's in a simpler world. In a different world in which senior people sat down and talked to each other, and it wasn't run by the outside forces. I think Merrick Garland is a very fine individual, and I think Neil Gorsuch is. They're both Americans, they're patriots, and they're going to do their best. I think judges who are unpredictable are the best judges. I want to see them act like judges. But our system doesn't want that anymore. You put a person up and you say, aha, that's who that person is. And you don't read the decision they've written. You don't understand how they've gone through the process of being a judge. But it fits into this broader matrix of right versus left, various interest groups at war with each other. And I don't know that our politics permit that, Michael. I think we're into a 55-45 confirmation process for the foreseeable future, unless one party gets 60 votes, then they'll go back to it.
Well, not necessarily. Yeah, that's interesting. One thing I just do want to interject here, though, is I actually think that many of the senators themselves, confined to Senate, are interested in the deeper discussion and the understanding what kind of judges they would be. I do think that I think it was a closer thing than people are aware of, that the Democrats might have delivered the votes needed. Whether it's done now, I don't know. But I have friends who worked on that committee, and it was like they're Democrats who really wanted to. And if things hadn't been so riled up because of Trump/Garland, I think it would have been a different result. But at this point, the genie may be out of the bottle.
Well, look, when David got confirmed, he got 90-9.
Right.
And one of the 9 people who voted against him was Ted Kennedy. Because it was the way, because he came out of Bush and all the rest. Even Ted Kennedy and Warren Rudman were very close friends, and he said, this is a good person. But Ted Kennedy did it to make a point. If we have those kind of votes on that, we're never going to get to the middle.
So this relates to that. There's a question, is there a center today, and can it come together in Congress or in America at large?
I believe there is. I believe we need to articulate it. I will tell you that to this day, as I walk around, people come up to me, talk to me. I'm amazed that John Kasich isn't president, because everybody said, I voted for him.
I didn't.
Well, a lot of Democrats have said it to me. There is a center. There must be a center, and the center must hold. The issue is the center, by its nature, doesn't organize as well as the polls do. And there are people who can put this in perspective. What we need is without relitigating the last campaign, there were 17 Republicans. And it was very hard and very frustrating to get heard when one of them was a television star. And then the center wasn't around one person. The center was around 4 or 5 people, all of whom I think were legitimate folks. I don't know how we get there, but I believe in the Senate, there are Republicans and Democrats who talk to each other. And we've been fortunate. I think whether it was Judd Gregg and Kelly Ayotte or Jeannie Shaheen, and go back before her, Tom McIntyre, we've had people who could talk to the other side. And I think there is still that group in the Senate. I mean, there are Republicans like Rob Portman in Ohio and Manchin from West Virginia and others who sit down and can make some sense out of how this works. There's not enough of them. And again, that's because we nominate by the polls. We don't nominate in the middle. But there is a center, and sooner or later the center must assert itself. The center must come together, and the center must hold. And until we get that, we're going to have this kind of fractured politics. But what I'm afraid of is they're going to take some kind of national tragedy or national security emergency that forces the center forward. And I hope we don't get to that point, because I don't want those things to happen.
Yeah, and I would say that I actually think there are more senators than most people think who are there.
I think that's right.
And I remember Paul Wellstone, who was as liberal can be, and I was at something where he was asked, what surprised you most about being a senator, and he said what he was most surprised about was how much he liked the Republican senators, that he could sit down and talk to them, and that they weren't, because everyone was publicly posturing in positions, though, the Republicans were taking positions that were complete anathema to him, but once they could talk, they could talk.
And I think it's being harder, Michael, to have those conversations now, because they're watched, and because the fundraising never stops, and because you're always, who's going to get the 5-minute shot, from the Russell Building on CNN the next morning. It's really hard to have those. I saw that right at the end of the Gorsuch stuff, trying to avoid the nuclear thing. McCain brought 10 of them into his office, and they were of all stripes. And I thought, well, that's what you need, but you need to have that on a regular basis instead of, Schumer became very partisan. So did McConnell, and they respond in kind. We need to have something. We need an issue or something where that we can demonstrate that there is a center to American politics, and not only there is, but it's safe for a candidate or an office holder to get to the center, as opposed to speaking only to the poll.
And just as an aside, this is a little slightly tangential, but sums on my mind a little bit, which is that one of the things that's interesting to me is how people in Washington have defined bipartisanship, and it really struck me in Obama's last State of the Union, and he was lamenting that he hadn't been able to work better with Republicans, but it was all defined as like working with Republicans in Congress, as opposed to bipartisanship being reaching out to, like, from a Democratic perspective, speaking to Republicans in the citizens in the country, which is different than speaking to Republican congressmen and senators who are more, restricted because of their internal politics and they're getting primaried and all of that. But if you could sort of speak over them to Republicans in the country, or if Republicans could speak over the Democratic, to their interest in what they care about, it seems like that might affect the underlying politics. But they think of bipartisanship as like just talking to people in Washington who are of the opposite party.
I think it's hard. I think there's a difference between bipartisanship and nonpartisanship. Yeah. And I'm not for nonpartisanship. I think we have parties for a reason. And having two parties as opposed to six ought to help us get to the middle more often. What's happening is the parties are splintering internally, and both parties are. And this is not something that the Republicans hold a unique patent on. It's how do you find that position? And I would rather see the gang of 6 or the gang of 12 that stand in the middle and attract people to them than saying, well, you're going to do what the caucus tells you to do.
Yeah, and so there's another question here referencing Chuck Todd saying that the primary process is what drives everybody apart because they get controlled by the extremes of their party.
He's not wrong about that.
Yeah.
You look at our Republican primaries in this state, which has traditionally been a pretty moderate state. It's getting harder and harder for a centrist Republican to get through it. And the best way a centrist Republican can get through it is there's 2 or 3 people who are far right. And then you can win with maybe 30% as opposed to get the 40%. But Chuck's right on that. You primary to the base, you primary to the wings, and you try to win the general election in the middle. This general election did not get won in the middle, and that's one of the reasons. And you've been kind in terms of not dwelling on the personality involved, but that personality issue is exacerbated because there is no center to go to. And we don't know about this president where his philosophic core is. Most other times when a president does something that people disagree with, they say, well, that's because he believes or she believes this. We don't know what he believes in the end, and we don't know what the default position is. We could always say, here's the default position. We have a hard time knowing that because every time we think we know it, it changes. And I'm not trying to be cute, it just does. And sooner or later, you need to know what that default position is. I'm sorry to go off of that.
No, that's it. We have a lot of people who don't like Trump in the audience. So do you think there's a red line for, the question is there a red line for Republicans with Trump? I mean, are there things, because by and large, Republicans in Congress have been, there's people who want a thorough investigation of Russia, which is sort of like distinct and, a national security thing, and people care about that. But I think other than that, they've pretty much been very careful not to oppose Trump on anything, even things that are not things that Republicans would necessarily always embrace. And are there things that you think that he'd lose a significant number of, let's say, congressional Republicans?
Watch the approval rating. I don't read as much the approval rating now, but if in 6 months he's in 20 to 25, 25 to 30 range, 6 months from now is 6 months closer to 2018, and watch it. I mean, I think there will come a point in which, because he doesn't have, the thing that the president doesn't have is that other Republican presidents, other Democratic presidents have, is loyalists in the party. And there are not a lot of folks in this party who are going to throw life preservers out. And let's see what happens. People ask me a lot about is it a potential of a challenge to him in 2020 in the party, and I'd say right now I don't believe it. but it's also a long way. And if that approval rating goes down and they then don't recognize that it's down and do something to turn it around, and which is a change in behavior or a new approach on the issues, or find something that people can coalesce around, that may do it. But right now it's sort of right where his base was anyways. It was around 35% anyways, and he got elected with that. So
Right. Okay. This one's sort of the same question. Do you have any, like, a lot's been made about, there are a bunch of things that people have made a lot of, which are sort of different than what we're talking about, about his business interests, him having family in the White House serving him, and all of those things. This question is specifically about having the daughter and son-in-law as top advisors. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that, or about it's unique, having sort of business interests so tied up with a president in this way?
Well, I remember the president had his brother as Attorney General, and that worked out okay. So let's not be too critical here. I actually think that from what I see, and I don't know anything you don't, but the brother, the son-in-law, and the daughter seem to be moderating influences right now, and I'm not disappointed that they're there. I think the business stuff is all part of the price of the stock. I mean, everybody knew about these businesses. I think it feeds it. Somebody who I'm very close to, who has never been involved in politics, now talks nonstop about Russia and the businesses. And I say, Chris, will you pass the peas? But it's a way to. It speaks to this person we don't know. And we don't know him, and we don't know anything about him beyond the sort of bellicose posturing. And so it's easy to believe that these things are there. But I will tell everybody in this room, I don't know how anybody in this room ever went to a Trump rally. My guess is very few, and I doubt anybody in here owns one of those horrible hats. But you go to those rallies and see the intensity of people who bought into this. And until the middle understands that intensity, we're going to weep and gnash teeth, but it's not going to change things. So it's great to say, it's Deus Ex Machina. He won because the Russians did it. And those are, and I read all those books. They're great. Those are really exciting books, but they're not based in reality. If they did, do I believe something happened? Obviously, something happened. Right. Whether it polluted the circumstance, but is it enough to change it? I don't know. I really don't. I'm less troubled by the family, because there's no question she's his daughter and he's her husband. So that's all given. We know that. I'm less troubled by the business, and I think we talk about the wrong things about the business. And this is where I worry about president. Every time the businesses went bad, he had an eraser at the end of the pencil, which was called bankruptcy. You don't get that option. Yeah. You walk away and you start all over. You don't have that option anymore. That's where I want to see.
It sort of relates to when I had that conversation with the former Democratic State Department official who was more sanguine about foreign policy. I'm moving around papers with my hand. That's what Trump does, actually.
He does it all the time.
Yeah, right. It's affecting me. But I sort of made the point that he may have all this respect for the generals now and be listening to them, but what happens when it goes wrong? Because something will go wrong in foreign policy, and at that point, maybe he doesn't declare bankruptcy, but maybe he starts thinking he knows better than the generals.
Well, you know he won't accept responsibility for it. He'll say, I got bad advice.
Right.
And at some point, you ought to remember what Truman had on the White House desk.
Yeah.
About where the buck stops. And sooner or later, that's going to happen.
So I'm going to do one more question, and then we'll kind of wrap up and talk a little bit about where we think things are going from here. This question's basically about the federal, like there's a big professional bureaucracy in all these agencies that knows a lot. And, and this question is sort of about how long can they resist But I'd sort of flip it around, and do you think that there might be an acculturation of these cabinet secretaries and of the president sort of beginning to realize these people aren't swamp-dwelling bureaucrats just trying to drain the American people of their tax dollars, but actually people who are professionals and care about their country and are trying
I believe that can happen in the agencies.
Yeah.
And I believe several of the appointments to these agencies may be more open to that than people think. I mean, one of the things you realize after a while is like the old line about the kid thinking he knows it all, and 10 years later, he's surprised how much his father had learned, you know? It's a little bit like that. They get in there, they've got all the answers, they know all the programs, and then there's somebody sits down, well, let me tell you, if you do that, this is what's going to happen in Laconia, New Hampshire, and they don't know that. And if they're and most federal bureaucrats are not there just to have a place to go each day and collect a check. They care about their issue. The environmental people care about the environment. The people in commerce care about what was good trade. I mean, they really care about it. And so, without overstating it, I think they're patriots. And I think that will work back into, because sooner or later these people sit up, especially frankly, the ones either in the military types or the business types who've had to build businesses by relying on what other people are telling them. They should eventually get to that point. That's going to be interesting. If they're so doctrinaire, they're going to end up talking to nobody but about 4 people. And that's
Pruitt starts believing in climate change, we'll know.
Well, and again, I mean, that's let's see what happens.
Yeah, yep. Okay, so, what do you think all of this means? I mean, it would have been great to sort of get into the divisions within the Republican Party and just, because like the Affordable Care Act, it wasn't, I mean, a lot of that was there's the Freedom Caucus, the Libertarian wing, there's the sort of political pragmatist wing, there's the centrist wing, there's the deficit hawk wings of the party. All of those, like all of the issues that you have mentioned and that are coming down the road are going to be, contested turf within the Republican Party. I mean, do you see a way, what's the path to governance that you can envision? Is it a path of the Republicans figuring out things amongst themselves, or do you get to the point where the pragmatists in the Republican Party are working with Democrats to get votes? Do you think they'd ever cross that line? I mean, the Senate, they may have to, assuming they don't get...
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, we just had a situation in the state where 40 Republicans blocked the governor's budget. Now, we'll see what happens when it comes back. But you've got a little of that there. I mean, sooner or later, there's no place else to go.
Right.
And I think that reality may strike faster. I mean, I was watching, obviously, everybody was Kansas last night to see how close that was. 7 points is closer than it should have been, but you got a governor who nobody likes there. So, I mean,
it wasn't just Trump.
But if things move in 2018, if we begin to see a 50-vote margin in the House go to 10, that's going to really say there's a need to do something. The problem with that is if that happens, if the Dems, I don't think the Dems can pick up seats, but if they hold where they are in the Senate, this is a very bad cycle for them. Right. But if they hold roughly the same, then the other side, the Democrats, gee, we're really close to winning, so that it lessens our ability to really just to go to the middle. So I do think some kind of national emergency crises will dictate moving together. I mean, for all its warts, horrible things, 9/11 allowed Bush to talk to all of us instead of some of us, and he was a different president after that in many ways. I don't want that to happen, but our politics is horribly broken. And as long as it's, and part of it's because of money, and part of it's because I don't think we all pay enough of attention to it, and they have learned how to manipulate us, and it's going to take people to really take it back and say, I'm not going to respond to that. And that's a big thing. I do not believe Trump himself has a political operation beyond Trump. I don't think they put one in at the RNC. I don't think they're going to go in and dictate the governors. Those are all going to be local races. Now, the more those local races stay local, the less they're going to say, you got me elected. And you may see some independence come out of that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is, I don't want to say that Trump could be the national crisis, but in some sense, you know, if this presidency continues to be or proves to be dysfunctional in ways that there are early signs it might be, it might result in people across a broad spectrum sort of recognizing that they need to take this a little more seriously, which is, I mean, I'd just be interested in your reaction to
Yeah,
that.
I think there is a understanding that voting and choosing is more than making a statement. Yeah. And this time it was enough for a lot of voters, frankly, to put a middle finger up to the country. And that's what they did. That's not governing. And sooner or later we're going to say, hey, we're supposed to govern. And I think people will make those choices differently.
Yeah, and there might be also more of a effort by sort of the elites of both party and the establishment of both party to address the things that cause the public to feel that way.
Yeah, and I could grow hair.
Anything can happen. Any closing thoughts on, you know, one thing we talked about earlier was off stage was sort of what does this mean for the presidency going forward and the process going forward?
Well, the presidency evolves. It's changing. This is a very different president. I've been reading a lot lately about the Eisenhower presidency. To me, he was the last great president. I'm a big Ike guy. But you think about the things. There's a great book out of all people by Bret Baier, who writes about what Eisenhower did the 3 days before Kennedy became president to put Russia in a box so Kennedy didn't have to deal with it. We wouldn't see that today. And that's too bad. I'm hopeful that we get to a better place. The money is tough, but in the end, we're a good country, and we're going to get to the right thing. And it's going to take a very unique candidacy. And I'm not being partisan here. We did not give, neither party gave the American people a choice. It was the most unsatisfactory choice they've had. And you think about if the choice had been between Joe Biden and John Kasich, and it would have been a very different, and we'd be having a very different conversation today.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, that was great. Really appreciate it.